Hi everyone, Yathani Yatano here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a review of the new Vivian Girls album, Memory. Rock trio Vivian Girls, they are back 5 years after their announced breakup in 2014. New album. Once a humble band from New York, the Vivs became an overnight sensation on the indie blogosphere after dropping their self-titled record in 2008. Also gaining some pretty high praise from established outfits such as Pitchfork and AV Club, though I think the trio's sound was more ahead of the curve than some people may have realized back in 2008, helping to set the table for some pretty major trends in the indie scene for the next 5 to 6 years. Meaning they were there doing their thing before lo-fi became a sensation with waves breaking onto the scene. Meaning they were there before surf rock guitars suddenly became a huge trend thanks to groups such as Beach Fossils and the Drums. And if Vivian Girls never existed, I fail to see how you get all of this very popular, dreamy, rough indie rock music with a really strong feminine voice. Whether it be Best Coast or Dum Dum Girls or Frankie Rose, who played with Vivian Girls. And you could even fast forward to hear the band's influence on newer groups, whether it be conscious or not, such as Heinz. Now, this is not to say that the Vivian Girls happened in a vacuum, that they didn't have their contemporaries, that they didn't have their influences. They most certainly did. Artists like Jay Retard and Black Lips were already killing it at about the time that they burst onto the scene. And the roots of lo-fi indie music go all the way back to the 1980s. But Vivian Girls' base of inspiration spread out much further than that, into surf rock, into twee, into noise pop, into 60s girl groups and classic punk. As I remember it, they were one of the few bands around this time trying to genuinely make the sounds of the Ramones, the Ronettes, the Ventures, and the Jesus and Mary chain all coexist on the same recording. Now, sadly, following this album up, the trio hit a bit of a sophomore slump with a very so-so record. The music scene was flooded with similar sounding bands, many of which had a larger commercial appeal. And by the time they dropped their third full-length album, the band had cleaned their sound up so much, I think they started to lose their original appeal. Even if it did feature standout singles like Heard You Say, which is easily one of the best tunes the Vivian Girls have ever put out. The band took a few years past this point to call it quits, but now they're back. And it's a very odd time for a return. I mean, the wave that the trio helped initiate is pretty much gone now, and if it doesn't have a trap beat behind it, the mainstream is pretty much deaf to it, as well as a good portion of the underground. The girls don't sound like they're vying for wide appeal on this one, though. It's more like they are going back to their very noisy and chaotic roots. It's 2008 all over again, with the trio bringing that smudgy, blaring, distorted sound they were once known for. But somehow, on certain tracks here, it is heavier, more distorted, maybe a bit thicker, especially on tracks like Most of All and Sludge. Easily the most brooding song the trio has ever put out. The guitars on this one are very fuzzy, certainly live up to the title of Sludge. Most of this album, though, does sound like you're hearing the classic makeup of a Vivian Girls record. All those noisy, ringing, almost droning guitars just roaring and roaring. It sounds like what you would get if you tried to make a Sun record, but with more of a surf rock guitar tone. And that sound, that wall of sound, is basically a canvas for the trio to lace in all of these wintry, chilly, strange vocal harmonies that are very breathy, very soft. The drums, especially the snare, just pierce through all that noise, and then the bass in the background very quietly provides a groove. Occasionally the trio reels it in a little bit, like on the track Your Kind of Life, where these demented warped guitars scream away in the background underneath some very clunky bass. Then there's these strange metallic chimey tones that dance on top of all of this. The sound is pretty twisted. The song itself is sour as hell, but it offers more clarity sonically than most of the tracks here. Also, comparing this record to the group's earlier work, while it is noisy, the instrumentation, the performances, the way everything syncs up, it seems a lot more methodically assembled. The singing isn't especially good in a traditional sense, though, and can definitely hold a track back if they are spotlit and not really selling the song all that well, namely on the track Lonely Girl. But for the most part, there are quite a few strong highlights in the first leg of this thing that seem to build on the usual Vivian Girls blueprint, like on the opening track Most of All, as well as the song Something to Do, which has some of the best momentum and chord changes on the entire thing. But for every track like this that stands out, out. There's another that seems to house pretty much the same sound, the same aesthetic, but the tune at the core of it is just not really all that good. Like At It Again, or even the title track on this thing, which might even be the most half-baked moment on this entire record. And the song All Your Promises is where, and I can't believe I'm saying this because this is not usually a focal point of Vivian Girls music, but the drums are particularly lackluster here. The drumming's not usually like the best thing about a Vivian Girls track, but it is so tedious and sparse on this one. It's really just kind of the snare providing most of the backbone when the percussion could have been doing so much more. As this track has one of the most gargantuan walls of guitar noise of any song here, and it just really could have used a bit more support. A couple of risks: Sludge that I mentioned earlier, super heavy, super noisy. Also the song I'm Far Away, whose dark, groovy bass lines and drums and screaming washes of guitar sound like the soundtrack to a gothed out beach party. I have my criticisms of this record, sure, but I didn't find any one track to be outright terrible. I just thought there were some tracks, quite a few, that were underwhelming. Quite a bit of this record I think sounds very samey to those who might not be all that into Vivian Girls' incredibly noisy and increasingly abrasive sound on this one. I think this is definitely one of the gutsier records in terms of harshness they've put out so far. And even though I do like that quality in Vivian Girls' music, I do have to admit it does suffocate quite a few of the songs here. But I mostly feel like this album is a pretty decent comeback for the band. Hopefully they continue to change things up and write sharper songs and bring the noise. I'm feeling a strong 6 to a light 7 on this one. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up, or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Vivian Girls, forever.